Alright, I just thought I'd take this little opportunity here to get these couple down. That was a little bit of Scottish, Russian, and something else in there. Irish, maybe? I don't know. Yugoslavian. Right. I had an idea for a short about a replicated mind, where the person who has their mind replicated onto a computer believes that once the process is completed, their original mind will have been transferred to the computer, and so when they arrive, they believe they were correct in their assumption and begin to traverse the simulated landscape. Which is not really a good way of describing that, but just believe that they're the only mind. They're the only mind, that they were always that mind. They're the original, basically. However, in reality, their mind was just replicated, and the mind in the human body persists and is told the process didn't work properly and they should continue their life as normal. Then the simulated mind is able to run at 1,000 times faster than their mind in the real world, and realise that the people on the outside are trying to contact him. But his mind is operating at such a high speed, it takes what he perceives to be years for the messages to arrive. He then makes huge amounts of scientific progress and discoveries, and is able to improve himself through editing the software upon which he runs. He realises he must translate his findings into condensed material to be understood and actualised in the real world. Also, that doesn't really... I don't think that's a good storyline to follow. It's an awful lot like a lot of the Black Mirror kind of episodes. I quite liked a different one where a person manages to... I needed to add something to my idea ages ago about how you could replicate human mind, and how we might have, if someone does it now, where they get a sample of their DNA from saliva or whatever, have their connectome done, so their brain scanned, connectome done. But you might also need to... There was something else. I forgot what the other thing was. You might also need to get like a PET scan or a fMRI scan going for a certain amount of time, and then just have that recorded just to see what your basal brain activity is. Then I reckon you could get your brain replicated in 100 years and they could bring you back to life. That's my theory. Anyway, so a person could do that, use that process to replicate their mind somehow. Obviously it's fictional. We don't know how we do it right now. And then have your mind running on a computer, and obviously the two minds that are running would both, if the subject who had their mind replicated was smart enough, they'd understand that although the mind which gets replicated into the computer they'd know that they weren't the original mind. It would be hard to actually understand that you'd just come into creation as an actual mind, because you'd feel exactly the same as the mind that's in the body. Anyway. And then I wonder what the interaction would be like between them. And then obviously, if we expect, a computer-generated mind to be far superior in terms of its processing speed than a human brain, then you might expect it to be able to make discoveries and revelations faster than the human mind. And I just wonder what the interaction would be like between the two things. So yeah, you could try and think about that or something. I don't know. I was just remembering back to my debates around why I don't think some people should be allowed to say a word, in this case the N-word, based solely on whether they have black skin or not. During this debate, the point was raised that some people shouldn't be allowed to use the word retard. And on many levels I agree, although my point remains that no one should want to use it, at least not in a way that is done with the sole intention to offend or harm others. Now, this case is especially compelling because most people realise that mentally handicapped individuals are not usually going to be able to process hateful speech directed towards them in a healthy way. Obviously, most humans are the same in this respect. Almost everyone can be offended to some degree by words alone. Well, I can't, because I'm so great. However, the way this differs from the use of... Although I do think it's... If you're in a kind of circle, if you're in like a room, 1,000 people hurling abuse at you, I think maybe the old Dalai Lama could ignore that. I don't know. Anyway, however, the way this differs from the use of the N-word is that the apparent determining factor for whether a person should be allowed to use it is the colour of their skin, which has absolutely no bearing on their understanding of the meaning of their words or their control over how they use them. In the case of mentally handicapped people, depending on the severity of their condition, a person may be considerably impaired with regard to their ability to discern whether words are appropriate for certain situations, and the effect those words will have on others. And so whilst I advocate that we should not hold people to different standards, where am I? We should not hold people to different standards depending on the colour of their skin, because this is not indicative of their character or mental capacity. I would say that reasonable allowances should be expected when conversing with people with a known mental impairment, people with Down syndrome or something. Not to say anything of the intelligence of people with this particular affliction, but those who can be said to have Tourette's would be hard done by if they were expected to uphold the same standard of speech as their contemporaries. I don't know how to actually pronounce that word, rather than rush through it and hope that people hear it right. And so exceptions must be made with regards to the way we expect such a person to behave during civil discourse. So yeah, if a Tourette's person can only say the N-word, well, I say can only say the N-word, can't help themselves from saying the N-word sporadically, then I don't think anyone's going to... Well, I think some people probably would until they understood what it means to have Tourette's. They can't control it. So, yeah, that's why I don't think we should be using the N-word and saying it's all right if you have certain skin colour and not all right if you have... Because you come into all kinds of... There are other hypothetical scenarios, so obviously the one I just gave is the Tourette's person who says it against their own volition. But what about albino people? Are they allowed to use it if they're born to black parents but have white skin on account of their... I don't know. And then what if black parents adopt a white child? Is that white child then allowed to use the word? I don't fucking know how it works. In Sam's most recent podcast, number 99, What Happened to Liberalism, the guest... I should probably have just got his name. The guest brought up a thought experiment, which I've tackled before, long ago, in an attempt... Shut up, Twigs. Twiggy! Twigs! Good God. It's the first time she's ever run one of these. My days. Anyway, which I have tackled before long ago in an attempt to defend the validity and usefulness of identity politics. He tackled it in an attempt to defend the validity and usefulness of identity politics. I shall not. Or just identity affiliation, rather, in certain scenarios. He's basically saying identity politics isn't all bad, or that there's some justification for it. The experiment in question is it reasonable in a situation where two people are drowning, say, and you only have the opportunity to save one person, and this act will guarantee the other person's death? Is it reasonable, if one of those two drowning people is a relative of yours, in this case your mother, for you to save her over the other person who you know to be someone else's mother? The guest argues that it is, and he assumed that this is the case because it's an emotional response, and he has a right to that emotional response, and logic and reason cannot tell him otherwise, or at least that's what I argue he is arguing. And with regards to the conclusion he reaches, he is in many ways correct. However, the means he uses to reach that conclusion are flawed on many levels. The reason it would be reasonable in that exact scenario to favour your mother is that the knowledge of who your mother is gives you information as to the kind of person they are. And seeing as the amount of information you have about the other drowning individual is very limited, you can assume little more than that they are a person of average moral clarity and value to the world. Clearly, obviously it sounds quite utilitarian right now, and in many ways it sort of is, but it's also sort of not, so maybe fuck off. Okay. Clearly he is a fortunate gentleman with a mother he is able to love, likely because she loved him. If, however, he'd been born to an abusive mother whom he could not love, and if in fact he understood her to be a truly hateful person incapable of bringing good into the world, then I would advocate that in the same hypothetical scenario, he would be best off saving the stranger's life, because it is more likely that the person is a better person than his mother. It is likely that the person is a better person than his mother. Well, yeah, more like, I don't know. And even one he could love more, and receive love from, and have a more fulfilling relationship with. Now, this decision has absolutely nothing to do with any of the people's identities, and everything to do with the knowledge and information available to them. Sam does an excellent job of pointing out to him that if at any point his apparent affiliation to any single group, movement, or ideology is undermined by a shift in the logical reasoning and sound arguments of that group, he will change sides to affiliate with whichever group is thinking soundly on that point. And this ties in with my hatred of the supposed heroism of unbridled loyalty to movements which My hatred of the supposed heroism of unbridled loyalty to movements, which expands to my dislike of the emotion of pride in acts for which you were not physically responsible. Yeah, I hate it when people claim to be proud of their... Well, I think it's a language barrier, okay? They don't actually mean pride, I hope, because if you're actually proud of something you didn't do, then it's not the right emotion. You can be thankful for, appreciate it, you can admire it, but to actually take pride in it is wrong, at least with my understanding of what the word pride means. See, and this all comes back to my old language barrier, and I think even language barrier is a bad word, because bad terminology, because it didn't really capture what I'm talking about. But yeah, and then pride is wrong in most of the cases it's used, I reckon. What was the other one? Loyalty. What did I say? Loyalty breeds stupidity, or loyalty breeds ignorance, or something like that. The idea that it's better to stick with a certain group, or a certain movement, or a certain identity, regardless of how they speak on certain topics, because for the most part they agree with you, is wrong. It's very, very wrong, and it's very, very wrong, and it's also wrong. So yeah, this is why I don't like the idea of things like even affiliating yourself with things like fucking atheism. I think for the most part, if we just don't use the labels, because everyone has their own perception of what a certain label means. Obviously, no one... A Nazi... Oh, actually, most people probably agree with... The Nazis probably agree with the people who are accusing them of being Nazis, what they actually mean by it. But so in the case of things like atheism and thingy, obviously there are all kinds of people who would describe themselves to be atheists, and many people who would describe other people to be atheists too. But everyone has their own understanding of what the archetypal, for want of a fucking better word, no, that's not. I don't want to use that word. What the exact definition of an atheist is. If their definition of an atheist were to come to life, how that would look, and they basically hold everyone to that standard. So obviously, an actual atheist will have this idea of a admirable person, and then a religious person who will have this idea of some kind of hateful person. And they're both, so long as they're both willing to use the label atheist for that atheistic person, then they're both going to have different ideas of who that person is. So I think if you just kind of, it's hard, because in many cases I think it probably would be beneficial to know that someone's a Nazi, than to just find out over the course of speaking to them for hours or weeks or whatever. You'd rather know straight away. But I think in many ways it might be best just to never claim to be or not even believe yourself to be of a certain thing. I don't think it really helps in the long run. Maybe it does, I guess. Even believing yourself to be a person of reason, sort of person who... But as soon as if reason becomes... I don't know if this actually works in this case, but if reason becomes unreasonable or something like that, then it's no longer reason. But I don't actually know how that would pan out. Yeah. Basically, labels probably bad for the most part. You're best off just judging people by their actual merit and character and all that rubbish. Alright, well, I can't believe I managed to get 14 minutes out of that drivel. Anyway, bye now.